Hey guys, welcome to NextGen Online, our Sunday edition. So this week we're actually starting a brand new series, and it's a series all about racial reconciliation. So I am passionate about this, as is the rest of our team, and I hope that you guys are as well, and that you'll learn something over the next few weeks as we talk about this subject. Daniel's going to bring us a great message tonight from the Word of God, but before that, Trevor's going to lead us through a time of worship.
In my mother's womb, you formed me with your hand, known and loved by you. Before I took a breath, when I doubted, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. There's a healing light just beyond the clouds. Oh, you walk through the fire. Yeah, I see clearly now. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. Make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. There's a healing light just beyond the clouds. Though I've walked through fire, yeah, I see clearly now. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistakes. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. When I doubt it, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistakes. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay.
Well, I guess tonight we're starting a brand new series about racial reconciliation, just like Becky said. And here's the thing. This conversation is a bit of a sensitive one, especially right now. And so right off the bat here, I want to give us a couple of guiding principles for this entire series, really. Because here's the thing. Before we dive into any of these conversations, together, I want us to commit to doing these two things. Number one, humble yourself. Humble yourself. I want to confess to you right off the bat here that I don't have all the answers. I don't have this all figured out. I haven't navigated this conversation a whole lot of times. And so I just want you to know I don't know all the answers, and neither do you. You see, it's really tempting to think that you have it all figured out. And the reality is that this is a complex and messy conversation. What may seem obvious and simple to you may have so many more layers to it than you realize. And so here's an encouragement. Know what you don't know. And for the most part, for most of us, there is a lot that we don't know and will never know whenever it comes to race and racism and racial reconciliation, just because of who we are. And so know what you don't know, humble yourself, so that you can do the second thing really well, which is listen. Listen, here's the thing. I know you have something to say. You have a voice and you want to use it. And I want you to use it too. And there are some cases where you should be using it, but not if you haven't spent any time listening. And let me just go ahead and encourage you here. You should probably be listening to some voices with different opinions. Allow yourself to gain some perspective and understand someone who thinks differently or looks differently than you do. You see, this is a crucial conversation. It matters. In some cases, to the point of life or death. I mean, we've likely all seen the news or heard the headlines over the last couple of months. You've likely heard names like Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd or Breonna Taylor, but there are a lot of names that maybe you haven't heard talked about too. Names that if I said them out loud, you might recognize. Like a student that has reported racial insults, or the dad of an African-American student that told me that his son's picture was posted on their neighborhood's Nextdoor app to figure out why he was walking the streets. You see, this conversation matters because we know people that it affects. And it matters because it matters to God. It always has, and it always will. And how do I know that? Well, check it out. Let's go back to the very beginning, the very start, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. You see, at this point, God has already created some amazing things. Mountains and oceans, massive trees, maybe even a platypus or two. However, God is still missing something. Something is still missing from creation. And so here's what he does. Genesis 1, verses 26 through 27 says, "Then God said, 'Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, the whole earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth.' And so God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them male and female." Niagara Falls, the Grand Canyon, the Gulf of Mexico, awesome stuff that God created, yet the pinnacle of God's creation is you and me. It's people. People created in God's own image. All of us. And that has huge implications for the subject of race and racism. It means that we're all deserving of the same love and respect because we all have the same starting point, God. And God desired unity and oneness from the outset. Sadly, this perfect unity crumbled and cracked just a couple of chapters later when Satan enters the picture. He slithers his way into the garden and deceives Adam and Eve into eating the forbidden fruit, resulting in the fall of man. And sin enters the world, and brokenness enters the world, and equality came under attack. But he didn't destroy God's desire or plan for unity and reconciliation. You see, he's not that powerful. So let's jump ahead to the middle of history, and I'll show you what I mean here. You see, Jesus' life and death mark the very middle of history. And towards the end of his life, we see another glimpse into this amazing vision that God has for unity and reconciliation. And shortly before Judas betrays Jesus, Jesus took a long time to pray and to plead with God. And though he covers a variety of topics in this prayer, the last thing he prays for is this. Listen to this. John chapter 17, verses 20 through 23. It says, "I'm praying not only for them, but also for those who will believe in me because of them and their witness about me. He's praying for you and me. He says the goal is for all of them to become one heart and mind, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, so they might be one heart and mind with us. Then the world might believe that you, in fact, sent me. The same glory you gave me, I gave them. So they'll be as unified and together as we are, I in them and you in me. And they'll be mature in this oneness and give the godless world evidence that you've sent me and loved them in the same way you've loved me. You see, maybe you've never noticed this prayer, but it is a powerful prayer for unity and reconciliation. Jesus says two things in this prayer that we can apply to the racial divide in our country and in our world. The first thing he said is that he wants all believers to be as unified as he and the Father are. And the last time I checked, that's really close given the whole Trinity thing. This means that he doesn't want us to be at arm's length or even just within the vicinity of one another. He wants us to be close, to be one. His heart is set on unity. But in order to have this unity, we need to break down the walls and the barriers between us. And that's why we have to talk about this issue. Listen to people whose stories sound different from ours. Believe our brothers and sisters of color when they share their pain and confess any part that we have played in it. We will get into more of that next week, though. The second thing that Jesus says is about our unity is it gives the world evidence for God. I mean, think about that. What an amazing opportunity. And it makes perfect sense when you think about it. When the world sees a melting pot of people who come from different backgrounds and cultures worshiping together, eating together, and loving one another, all they can do is scratch their heads. Think about it. Normally, people hang out with those who are like them. For the most part, we don't like to cross boundaries or to leave our little bubbles. The church is different, though, because our identity as Christians, it transcends all of those other identities, even ethnic ones. When our diverse family comes together despite our differences, the world starts to realize there's something going on here. There's something greater behind all of this, and they start to see the strings, so to speak. Here's a question. Have you ever been to a play? You see, if you go to a play, and I'm talking about like a big production, like a Broadway type of situation where they have actors doing all these acrobatic things in the air. And if you sit close enough, you might notice something that you've never noticed before. You see, if you sit in the back, you see these actors doing these amazing things, you think, wow, they're really awesome. But if you sit close enough, you might just see the strings that are attached. And I can't help but think if unbelievers get close enough to us, and if the light shines just right, they may see the strings of God moving us toward unity and reconciliation. And I love that Jesus didn't just pray for that vision either, he acted on it. Think about Jesus' interaction with the woman at the well in John chapter 4, verses 7 and 9. It says, "A woman of Samaria came to draw water. 'Give me a drink,' Jesus said to her. And then she asks him, 'How is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman?' For Jews do not associate with Samaritans." Did you catch that? For Jews do not associate with Samaritans. You see, sadly, in Jesus' day, there was deep prejudice between Jews and Samaritans, not unlike the gap that exists in our society today between people of different ethnicities. But oddly enough, this doesn't stop Jesus from bridging the gap. He affirmed this woman's dignity by initiating a conversation and shared the gospel with her. Oh, and if that word Samaritan sounds familiar, it may be because you've heard the story of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10, where Jesus tells this story to address the Pharisees' religious hypocrisy and the very same prejudice he personally fought against in John 4. What I'm saying is Jesus lived this amazing vision that God had. And Satan has caused so much division since the fall of man. But in John 17 and in John 4, we see Jesus right in the middle of history. And his heart was still set on unity and reconciliation. So much so that he went to the cross for it. And unfortunately, if we look around, it doesn't take long to see that Jesus' prayer isn't quite fulfilled yet. Thankfully, we haven't arrived at the end of the story just yet. You see, if we fast forward one more time to catch a glimpse of this amazing vision God has realized, it's a beautiful picture of where we're headed and what we're fighting for. If you jump to the very end of the story in Revelation chapter 7, here's what I want you to know. As you turn there, I just want to throw out this little disclaimer. Revelation can be a really confusing book. There are sea creatures and dragons and other things that you'd expect to find in Trevor's favorite movie, The Lord of the Rings. But the reason that we see all of this strange and captivating imagery is because it's a vision of the future. And even though some of it is tough to understand and maybe even confusing, this passage in Revelation 7 is clear as day. And it's amazingly beautiful. Let's read it together. Revelation chapter 7 verses 9 and 10 says this: "After this I looked, and there was a vast multitude from every nation, tribe, people, and language, which no one could number, standing before the throne and before the Lamb. They were clothed in white robes with palm branches in their hands, and they cried out in a loud voice, 'Salvation belongs to our God who is seated on the throne and to the Lamb.'" See, John receives this amazing vision of the future kingdom where a massive crowd of people from every nation and tribe and language are worshiping God together. Stop and just picture that for just a moment. People of all different skin colors and backgrounds and cultural groups worshiping the same amazing, reconciling God. And this is not a picture of God's creative diversity in Genesis 1:26 on display, but a fulfillment of Jesus' prayer in John chapter 17. It's an assurance that we're going to make it. I love the way that the King, Dr. Martin Luther King, echoes this. You see, the night before Dr. Martin Luther King was murdered on his balcony, he uttered these powerful and prophetic words. He says, "He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." I mean, that's some powerful stuff. And if you listen, Dr. King's words sound a lot like John's vision. They're just more particularly applied to racial reconciliation. Because in Dr. King's words, one day racism will vanish forever in the light of God's glory. Later on in the book of Revelation, it confirms this. It tells us that there will be a day where the glory of God will fill the earth and we won't have this ache of division any longer. We will fully celebrate God's good design and grand vision together. And so although we're not there just yet, we have a direction to run and an assurance that we win. You see, here's the thing. We know that God has it. But in the middle now, there's still some work to do. And so with all of that said, just let me remind you of this. This conversation matters. It matters to God. It always has, and it always will. And here in the middle of it, my prayer is that we humble ourselves and that we listen. Why don't we just start making that vision a bit of a reality today?
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that great word. I want to challenge you guys to practice those two things, to practice being humble and listening, acting out of humility and genuinely listening to those around you. One of the things that we want to challenge you guys to do throughout this series, and pretty much for the rest of your lives, is to be in conversation about this topic. We hope that you guys that are meeting with your small groups are talking through this and some practical ways that you can become better, more humble, more listening. If you're not meeting with your small group over the summer, we have an opportunity for you guys to meet with us, with our NextGen team, to talk through some of these things and to hash some of this out. That's going to be happening on Wednesdays. And your parents should have received a link to Zoom to join us for those meetings. So check with your parents, join us on Wednesdays, or keep talking about this in your small groups. We will see you next time for NextGen Online.